All right, so welcome everyone. We are starting today with Shrimad Bhagavata Mahapurana, Book 9, Discourse 4. This is entitled The Stories of Nabhaga and King Ambarisha. So the context for what just led up to this was that Sri Shuka has been narrating to Parikshit the histories of the children of Vaivasvata Manu and the different branches of his line. And so we have gone through several of the branches and we have more to go. Sri Shuka resumed. A son of Nabhaga, Nabhaga was one of the sons of Vaivasvata Manu. A son of Nabhaga was Nabhaga, to whom the youngest of his brothers and most learned just returned from the house of his guru after an unusually long period as a religious student. His elder brothers assigned the care of their aged father, Nabhaga, for his share of the ancestral property, which they had already divided among themselves, leaving nothing for Nabhaga, whom they thought would remain a lifelong celibate in the ashram of his guru. Brothers, what have you set apart for me? He asked them upon his return home. We hereby allot our father to you, they replied. Nabhaga then approached his father and said, my elder brothers have given you as my share, O dear father. And the father replied, pay no heed to their word, dear child. These neighboring brahmanas, scions of the sage Angira, are performing at present a big sacrifice. Coming to the ritualistic course for every 6th day, the wise ones commit error in that course, my learned son. Teach those noble souls a couple of suktas in propitiation of the Vishvedevas. While ascending to heaven on the completion of the sacrifice, they will bestow on you all their wealth that may be left after the sacrifice. Therefore, approach them. Then he did, in the same way as he was told, and the said brahmanas rose to heaven, having bestowed on him whatever was left after the sacrifice. Coming up from the north, a certain dark-looking person, who was in truth no other than Rudra, the god of destruction, said to Nabhaga while he was about to appropriate that wealth, all this wealth left on the sacrificial grounds is mine. Nabhaga, the scion of Vaivasvata Manu, thereupon replied, this is mine, inasmuch as it has been vouchsafed to me by the sages who performed this sacrifice. Let our question be referred to your father, the dark stranger replied. Nabhaga went and asked his father accordingly, and his father said, at some sacrifice performed of yore by Daksha Prajapati, the sages determined everything left on the sacrificial grounds as a share meant for Rudra. Hence, it's true that God deserves all that wealth. Returning and bowing low to Rudra, Nabhaga said, the wealth left on the sacrificial grounds is undoubtedly yours, O Lord. So says my father, O Holy One. With my head bent low, therefore I pray for your grace. Since your father, replied Rudra, has spoken what is right, and you too have uttered the truth, I hereby impart to you, the Rishi of Vedic mantras, knowledge which is the same as the eternal absolute Brahman. Please also accept for your subsistence the wealth left after the sacrifice as a gift from me. Saying so, Lord Rudra, who was so fond of truth, disappeared. He who with a fully concentrated mind reverently remembers this story, morning and evening, becomes a learned man as well as a knower of the meaning of Vedic mantras and attains his goal. From Nabhaga sprang up Ambarisha, an eminent devotee of the Lord and virtuous, on whom even the punishment inflicted by a Brahmana, a punishment that was not frustrated anywhere before, had no effect. And the King Parikshit, to whom this story is being narrated, submitted, I long to hear the story of that royal sage, full of wisdom, against whom the scourge fully released by a Brahmana, which is difficult to avert, did not prove effectual. Sri Shuka replied, having inherited the globe with its 7 dvipas and an inexhaustible store of wealth and unequaled power and luxuries, The highly blessed Ambarisha regarded all that as equal in value to objects seen in a dream, even though it was most difficult to attain in the eyes of men. Knowing as he did the perishableness of wealth through which man falls a prey to infatuation, he had attained that supreme devotion to Lord Vasudeva and his pious devotees, by virtue of which this wealth was regarded by him as no better than a clod of earth. He fixed his mind exclusively on the lotus feet of Lord Vishnu, the enchanter of all. He employed his words in recounting the virtues of Lord Vaikuntha, his hands in sweeping the temple of Sri Hari, and so on, his auditory sense in hearing the excellent stories of the immortal Lord. He employed his eyes in seeing the idols and temples of Lord Sri Krishna, the bestower of liberation, and his tactile sense in touching the limbs of his servants. He devoted his olfactory sense to the fragrance of the blessed tulsi leaves derived from the Lord's lotus feet, and his sense of taste to the food, etc., offered to him, eating the prasadam. He employed his feet in repairing on foot to the tracts of land consecrated to Sri Hari, and his head and bowing to the feet of Lord Vishnu, the controller of our senses, and coveted the offerings, such as wreaths of flowers, sandal paste, scents, and dainties, made to the Lord not with a desire to gratify his senses only, but with a view to the Lord's service. And he did all this in order that attachment may be conceived in his mind for the servants of Lord Vishnu, enjoying excellent renown. Thus resigning from day to day all his round of duties to the Supreme Lord, who is above sense perception and whose worship excels all other sacred observances, and practicing devotion to him with his entire being, he ruled the earth, it is said, as instructed by Brahmanas like the sage Vasishta, devoted to him. He propitiated the Almighty Lord, presiding over sacrifices, through a number of horse sacrifices conducted by Vasishta, Asita, Gautama, and other sages, in a desert land facing the stream of the Sarasvati River, sacrifices or yajnas that had all their limbs, as well as sacrificial fees, paid to the priests and other brahmanas for performing the yajna, supplemented by abundant riches. In his yajnas, the superintending priests, as well as the priests officiating at the yajna, and other men assembled there, who were all richly dressed and adorned, and were gazing with unwinking eyes in wonder, looked alike in appearance with the gods. Even the celestial region, beloved of immortals, was never solicited by his men, much less by the Raja himself, who constantly heard and chanted the stories of Lord Vishnu of excellent renown. Pleasures of sense which were not easily attainable even to the Siddhas did not delight the aforesaid men, who always perceived Lord Mukunda in their heart, eclipsed as they were by the bliss of self-realization which they enjoyed. Thus propitiating Sri Hari through the performance of devotion coupled with asceticism, as well as through the performance of his duties, the aforesaid king gradually gave up all attachments with respect to his houses, wife, children, and other relations, excellent elephants, chariots, horses, and foot soldiers, inexhaustible store of jewels, ornaments, and weapons, etc., as well as regarding his endless treasuries. He developed the notion that they were all unreal. Pleased with his exclusive devotion and love, Sri Hari delivered to him his own chakra Sudarshana, the terror of his adversaries and the protector of his servants. Intending to please the all-enchanting Lord Vishnu, the heroic King Ambarisha undertook in earnest, along with his wife, who had a similar disposition, a vow to fast on every Dvadashi, the 12th day of each lunar fortnight, for a whole year. So there's a footnote mentioning here that although every Vaishnava of the Lord Vishnu was enjoined to fast on the Ekadashi, the 11th day of each fortnight. Ambarisha for 1 year took the vow to fast 2 days in a row every time instead of just the Ekadashi, to do the Dvadashi as well. On one Dvadashi day, during the month of Kartika, the Raja, who had duly fasted for 3 previous nights, and bathed in the river Kalindi, which is another name for the Yamuna River, worshipped Sri Hari in the sacred forest of Madhuvana. Madhuvana is where later the city of Mathura was built. But at this time, it's just a forest. There's no city there yet. Having bathed Lord Vishnu, according to the procedure laid down in the scriptures for a royal bath, requiring a rich variety of accessories, such as sandal paste and flowers for scenting the water with, he worshipped him with his mind absorbed in him by offering raiment and ornaments, as well as sandal paste, flowers, water for washing the hands with, and other articles of worship, and similarly honored with reverence the highly blessed, devoted Brahmanas, even though they had all their objects accomplished, and thus did not seek any honor from him. He then gifted so pious Brahmanas and sent to their houses 60 crores of cows endowed with abundant milk, good disposition, young age, and a good appearance, and accompanied by their calves and necessary appendages, which are usually given along with the gift of a cow, such as a vessel for holding milk while milking a cow, and which had their horns plated with gold and hoofs with silver, and were covered with excellent pieces of cloth. He first gave the Brahmanas delicious and most excellent food to eat, and permitted by them, when they had received all their desired objects, such as these presents of money, he set about concluding the fast by taking his meal. That very moment there appeared before him an unexpected guest in the person of no less a personage than the glorious sage Durvasa. Putting off his meal, the king honored the newcomer by rising from his seat, offering him a high seat and other articles of worship, and approaching and bowing at the soles of his feet, prayed him to dine. Having gladly accepted his prayer, the sage went to finish his routine work for midday, being bathing and devotions, since of course he keeps the Trikala Sandhya, so there's certain bathing and devotional rituals that he does every dawn, noon, and dusk. And fixing his mind on the infinite, plunged into the sacred water of the Kalindi for his bath. Since only half a muhurta, or 24 minutes, was left on the 12th day, and it was necessary to conclude the fast during the hours of the Dvadashi itself in order to keep his vow for the 1 year, Ambarisha began to deliberate with the Brahmanas on the question of concluding the fast in the face of such a moral crisis. Since on the one hand, he took a vow to break his fast during this period, which is over in 24 minutes, but on the other hand, it technically breaks the rules of propriety for him to eat before his guest eats, but his guest is bathing first and is probably not going to eat within 24 minutes. He said, since there is sin in showing disrespect to a Brahmana by inviting him to a dinner and then taking one's meal before feeding him, and since there is also papam in not concluding one's fast within the hours of the Dvadashi, since he has taken the vow to do so, pray tell me a course of action consequent upon which good may betide me, and papam may not touch me. Then, arriving at a conclusion in consultation with the Brahmanas, he said, since to take water, so declare the Brahmanas, that is as good as taking food for the purpose of ritually breaking a fast, and at the same time it is not eating, hence I shall break my fast with water alone. Having thus taken water and contemplating on the immortal Lord with his mind, that royal sage Ambarisha only awaited, O jewel of the Kurus, the return of the Brahmana, the sage Durvasa. It's important to understand about Durvasa, among other sages. Durvasa is an avatar of Rudra and is an infamously rage-prone sage. He's a Leela avatar of Rudra that expresses the Leela of destructive fury at the slightest. If there's any loophole through which Durvasa can perceive an insult and fly into a rage, that's kind of the whole purpose of his being. Having gone through his midday routine, the sage Durvasa returned from the bank of the Yamuna and, greeted by the king, came to know of his act of drinking water through his intuition. With his limbs shaking through rage and with a face curved with a frown, the sage, who was extremely hungry too, spoke with reference to the emperor, who stood with joined palms. Oh, look at the violation of dharma on the part of this cruel monarch, intoxicated with fortune and lacking in devotion to Lord Vishnu, and looking upon himself as all-powerful, and that having invited me, arrived at his door as a newcomer to accept his hospitality, has broken his fast without offering food to me. I shall forthwith show you as such the consequences. Speaking thus and pulling a matted lock from his head, so he rips out a chunk of his own hair. The sage, who is inflamed with anger, created by means of the ripped lock of hair, so transformed the hair into a female evil spirit, a kritya, akin to the fire seen at the time of universal dissolution in order to get rid of Ambarisha. Though clearly perceiving her overhead, emitting flames and rushing toward him sword in hand, making the earth quake under her feet, the emperor did not stir from his place. Already told off by Lord Vishnu, the Supreme Person, the Universal Spirit, for the protection of his devotee, the King Ambarisha, the Chakra Sudarshana, which Vishnu had granted to Ambarisha, burnt the aforesaid Kritya, even as fire would burn an angry serpent. Frightened to see over his head the discus rushing towards him after burning the Kritya, and his own endeavor to kill Ambarisha infructuous, the sage ran in his anxiety to save his life in different directions. Sudarshana, the discus of the Lord, pursued him even as a wildfire with its flames thrown upwards by the wind would chase a serpent. Observing the discus close upon his heels, as aforesaid, the sage fled in his eagerness to enter a cave of Mount Meru. Flying in this way, Durvasa betook himself to the quarters, the sky, the terrestrial world, the subterranean regions, the oceans, the different lokas, as well as their guardians, and heaven. But whithersoever he fled, he saw at his back in each such region the formidable Sudarshana. When no protector was found by him anywhere, he got frightened at heart, and seeking an asylum, approached the glorious Brahma, the Creator, and prayed, O Maker of the universe, O Brahma, the self-born, protect me from the might of Lord Vishnu. Brahma observed, after a period of 2 parardhas, when the pastime of the Lord in the shape of creation and the activity of the universe is over, my sphere, along with the rest of the universe, will surely vanish as a result of the mere contraction of brows on the part of the Lord in the form of the time spirit, eager to burn away all this. Myself, Lord Shiva, the source of the universe, and others with Daksha and Bhrigu at their head, the foremost of Prajapatis, the lords of created beings, Bhutapatis, the lords of ghosts and other spirits, and the chief of the Devas, such as Indra, we all submissively obey his law, beneficial to the whole world, as a burden placed on our head. Thus refused by Brahma the Creator, and scorched by Sudarshana, the sage Durvasa sought as his shelter Lord Shiva, the destroyer of the universe, who lives on Mount Kailasa. Sri Rudra remarked, we have no power, O dear son, over the infinite all-pervading supreme, in whom indeed other universes too as vast as this, forming the body of jivas in the person of Brahma, the birthless creator, appear in thousands at the appointed time for creation, and then cease and merge back in him at the time of final dissolution, universes in which we are being tossed about. Myself, the sages Sanat Kumara and Narada, the glorious Brahma, the creator, Lord Kapila, the sages Aparantaratma, the sages Apantaratma and Devala, Dharma, the Dharma Deva, the sage Asuri, and other omniscient lords of Siddhas, headed by the sage Marichi, we are all unable to penetrate his Maya, enveloped as we are by that Maya. Since this is a weapon of that Lord of the universe and therefore hard to resist for us, seek him alone as your protector. Sri Hari will bring you security. Having no hope left, the sage Durvasa went from there to the Lord's realm called Vaikunta, in which resides Lord Vishnu, the abode of Sri, along with his wife Sri, the goddess. Being scorched by the fire of Sudarshana, the sage fell shuddering at the soles of the Lord's feet and said, O immortal and infinite Lord sought for by the righteous, O protector of the universe, do protect me, an offender. An offense has been committed by me against those beloved of you, ignorant as I was of your supreme glory. Wipe off that sin, O director of the universe. By the very utterance of your name, even a denizen of Naraka gets liberated. The glorious devotee, the glorious Lord said, My heart having been completely taken possession of by my pious devotees, I am really subject to the control of such devotees, like one who is not self-dependent, O Brahmana. And I am the only beloved of my devotees. As apart from my pious devotees, to whom I am the highest goal, I covet neither myself nor Goddess Sri, my consort, who is eternal like myself, O holy sage. How dare I forsake them who, having renounced all attachments for their wife, house, children, relations, their very life and wealth and their welfare in this and the other world, have sought me as their protector? Pious souls who have fastened their heart on me and look upon all with the same eye, enthrall me by their devotion, even as virtuous ladies enthrall their virtuous husband. Feeling sated through devotion, they do not desire even the 4 types of final moksha, beginning with salokya, or residence in the same heaven with the Lord. The other 3 types being samitya, or close proximity with the Lord, sarupya, or similarity of form with the Lord, and sayujya, or absorption into the Lord. Though attained through service rendered to me, how then can they covet anything else, such as the position of Indra, which is subject to the ravages of time? Pious souls are my very heart, the most beloved of me, while I am the very heart of the righteous. They do not cognize anything else dearer than me, nor do I know in the least anyone else dearer than them. I shall point out to you a means of escape from this calamity, O Durvasa. Please hear it. Seek him alone, because of whom this violence perpetrated by you has actually recoiled on you and thus proved to be an act of self-immolation. Force employed against the righteous brings harm to the striker. Asceticism and worship offered to a deity are both conducive to the highest good, or final moksha, for Brahmanas endowed with humility and other virtues. In the case, however, of a doer who is lacking in modesty, those very practices lead to contrary results, or could prove harmful. Therefore, O Brahmana, may good betide you. Approach King Ambarisha, the son of Nabhaga, and seek the forgiveness of that highly blessed soul. Then alone will peace come to you. Thus ends the 4th discourse, forming part of the story of Ambarisha, in Book 9 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. And Discourse 5 is the story of Ambarisha concluded. Sri Shuka continued, thus directed by the Lord and scorched by his Sudarshana Chakra, Durvasa came back to Ambarisha and full of sorrow clasped the latter's feet. Observing the endeavor on the part of the sage to seek his forgiveness, Ambarisha, who was much ashamed of the sage's touching his feet and sore stricken with compassion, began to extol the aforesaid missile of Sri Hari in the following words. Ambarisha prayed, you are Agni, the god of fire, and the glorious sun god. You are Soma, the moon god, the lord of the other luminaries. You are water, you are the earth and the sky, the air, the 5 objects of senses, and the senses themselves. Hail to you, O Sudarshana, endowed with 1,000 spokes and beloved of the immortal Lord. O destroyer of all missiles, may you be propitious to the Brahmins, O protector of the earth. You are righteousness. You are truthful in polite speech, as well as the faculty of regarding all with the same eye. You are the deity presiding over all sacrificial performances, as well as the enjoyer of all sacrifices. You are the protector of the worlds and the soul of the universe. You are the transcendent effulgence of the Supreme Person. O Sunabha, I simply address the exclamation, hail to you, the upholder of all virtues, a veritable fire to destroy demons given to unrighteousness, the protector of the 3 worlds, possessed of purest effulgence, quick as thought, and credited with marvelous deeds. By your splendor, consisting of righteousness, the darkness of great souls is dispelled and their light preserved. This creation, manifest and unmanifest, high and low, is illuminated by you. Unfathomable is your glory, O ruler of speech. When hurled by the Lord, who is untainted, you actually enter the force of the Daityas and the Danavas, O invincible one. You shine brightly in battle while unceasingly lopping off their arms, trunks, thighs, feet, and necks. As such, you, O shield of the world, have been detailed by Lord Vishnu, the wielder of the mace, for the extermination of the wicked, capable as you are of resisting all. Therefore, in order to bring good luck to our race, kindly grant safety to this Brahman of the sage Durvasa, for that would be an act of grace to us, and that it would save us from the sin of being an instrument in the death of a Brahmana. If gift was ever made by us, or a sacrifice duly performed, or our allotted duty satisfactorily performed, and if our race has looked upon the Brahmana as a deity, let the Brahmana be relieved of his distress as our reward. If the Lord, who is the one abode of all excellences, is pleased with us by virtue of our looking on all living beings as his own embodiments, let the Brahmana be rid of his trouble. Sri Shuka continued. While the Emperor Ambarisha was thus hymning Sudarshana, the said chakra of Lord Vishnu, which had hitherto been scorching the Brahman Durvasa on all sides, cooled down at the king's entreaty. Rid of the burning heat of the fire of the missile Sudarshana, Durvasa now felt relieved and applauded the emperor, pronouncing the highest blessings on him. Durvasa observed, "Ah, the glory of servants of the infinite Lord has been witnessed by me today, and that you, O emperor, strive for the good even of him who has wronged you. Indeed, what is there hard to accomplish for benevolent souls, and what is there difficult to forswear in the eyes of the high-souled, by whom Lord Sri Hari, the guardian of devotees, has been lovingly installed in their heart? What could there be wanting on the part of servants of that Lord of hallowed feet, through the very hearing of whose name a person is rid of all impurities? O king, I have been greatly favored by you, an extremely kind-hearted soul, and that my life has been saved by you, overlooking my offense." The emperor, who had still not taken his meal in the hope of the sage's return and still hoping for his guests to eat first, sumptuously fed him after gratifying him first by clasping his feet. Sated at heart, after partaking of the rich fare brought to him with reverence and gratifying every wish, Durvasa politely said to the king, "Please take your food. I am really pleased and obliged by the sight, touch, and talk, as well as by the hospitality offered with a mind fixed on the Supreme Self, of a great devotee of the Lord in you. Celestial ladies will repeatedly celebrate this blemishless deed of yours. Nay, this earth itself will loudly proclaim your most sacred glory." Sri Shuka resumed. Having thus acclaimed the king and asking leave of him, Durvasa, who was highly gratified, rose through the heavens to Brahmaloka, attainable only through disinterested action. A whole year had elapsed before the sage, who had gone to Brahmaloka, returned again to the capital of Ambarisha. And longing for a sight of the sage, the king, so the tradition goes, subsisted on mere water all these months. And when Durvasa left, the said Ambarisha ate the remnant of food that had been rendered most holy by being partaken of by a Brahmana. And perceiving the evil plight and ultimate redemption of the Rishi Durvasa, as well as his own firmness in remaining without any food for a whole year, he thought it all to be a glory of the Supreme. Possessed of many such qualities, the said Emperor Ambarisha practiced devotion to Lord Vasudeva, the Supreme Spirit and the ultimate reality, through his multifarious duties that stood offered to him, by virtue of which devotion he regarded all blessings, including the position of Brahma, the Creator, as no better than so many forms of damnation by comparison. Now, leaving his kingdom to the care of his sons, who were all possessed of a disposition similar to his own, the wise Ambarisha retired to a forest. Fixing his mind on Lord Vasudeva, his own self, he eventually had his round of births and deaths brought to a close. Anyone reciting and repeatedly musing on this aforesaid sacred story of Emperor Ambarisha bids fair to become a devotee of the Lord. Thus ends the fifth discourse entitled The Story of Ambarisha in Book 9 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 6, the posterity of Ikshvaku, the stories of Mandhata and the sage Sobhari. Sri Shuka resumed. Virupa, Ketuman, and Shambhu were the three sons of Ambarisha, who took over his realm and who, we were just told, possessed the same, a similar disposition to his. From Virupa, the eldest of the three, sprang up Prashadashva, and the latter's son was Ratitara. Prayed to for progeny, to continue the thread of Ratitara's line, the celebrated sage Angira, a mind-born son of Brahma, begot through the wife of Ratitara, who was issueless, a number of sons invested with a glory resulting from the knowledge of the Vedas. So this is done in the case of if a king is infertile, as evidently Virupa was. A substitute father will sometimes be used to impregnate his wife. Often a great sage. This was done with Veda Vyasa, famously in the Mahabharata. In this case, the same thing is done with Prajapati Angira. Though born of the wife of Ratitara, they actually became known as Angirasas after their biological father. They were recognized as the foremost of the Ratitaras, being Brahmanas endowed with the qualities of Kshatriyas, since their father was a Brahman and their mother was a Kshatriya. From the nostrils of Vaivasvata Manu, even while he was sneezing, sprang up a son, Ikshvaku. Of his 100 sons, Vikukshi, Nimi, and Dandaka were the eldest. Of these 100 sons, 25 became rulers of small provinces in the eastern quarter of Aryavarta. Aryavarta is the sacred tract of land lying between the Vindhya range and the Himalayas. In other words, basically North India. Parikshit. And the same number, another 25, were rulers of small provinces in the western region. 3, the eldest 3 named above, in the center, so just south of the Vindhyas, and the rest in other parts. Once on the occasion of a sraddha, the sraddha rite, which is performed in honor of the departed spirits of one's deceased relations, during the ashtakas, which are the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 13th days of either fortnight of a lunar month, which are the days which are propitious for the performance of the sraddha rite, Ikshvaku peremptorily said to his son Vikukshi, Vikukshi, go and bring me some flesh fit for being offered to the Pitris, a meat offering. Please do not tarry. Saying, be it so, the heroic Prince Vikukshi went to the forest, and having killed some animals fit for being used in the Sraddha rite, thoughtlessly ate of the flesh of a hare after roasting it, fatigued and hungry as he was, on his way home from the forest. He gave the rest of the flesh to his father Ikshvaku, but Ikshvaku's guru, the sage Vasishta, when requested to sprinkle the meat with water and thus consecrate it, said, this meat has been contaminated by being eaten of beforehand and is thus unfit for Sraddha. Having come to know of the aforesaid act of his son, as told by his guru, who knew by intuition what had happened, the king Ikshvaku, in an angry mood, exiled from his country his son Vikukshi, who had abandoned the practice of good men. The king then held a talk on the ultimate truth with the sage Vasishta, his guru. As a result of such talk, he became established in Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge or realization of one's identity with the ultimate reality. And on casting off the body, attained oneness with that which is higher than all. His father Ikshvaku being now dead, Vikukshi returned home, and while I guess assuming that he was still the heir and that his exile was only for the rest of his father's life, and while ruling this earth, propitiated Sri Hari through a number of sacrifices and became known as Shashada, literally meaning rabbit eater. His son Puranjaya, the conqueror of a city, was nicknamed as Indravaha, the rider of Indra, and also as Kakutstha, which it means bull rider. Now here, by virtue of what deeds he earned these 3 names. In those days, there was a conflict of the Devas and the Asuras, a conflict which all but wiped out the entire creation. The hero Puranjaya was enlisted as an ally by the Devas that had been vanquished by the Daityas. Desired by Puranjaya for the role of a mount to him, Indra assumed the form of a gigantic bull at the instance of Lord Vishnu, the god of gods and the soul of the universe. Protected by an armor and taking a celestial bow and sharp arrows, Puranjaya, who was eager to fight, rode on the back of the bull while being praised by the gods and took his seat on its hump. Invigorated by the strength of Lord Vishnu, the most ancient person in the Supreme Spirit, he besieged with the help of the Devas the city of the Daityas in the west. His fight with the Daityas was very close and thrilling, and he dispatched with his arrows to the abode of Yama all the Daityas that encountered him on the battlefield. Quitting the range of flight of his shafts, which was hot as the fire at the time of the final dissolution, the Daityas, who were being severely struck, fled to their home in Patala. Having conquered the town of the Daityas to the west, so full of splendor, as well as all the wealth contained in it, that royal sage made it over to Indra, the Vajradhari, the wielder of the thunderbolt. It was for these reasons that he was called by the names Indravaha, Kakutsta, and Puranjaya. Indravaha meaning the rider of Indra, Kakutsta meaning literally hump rider, the rider on the hump of the bull, and Puranjaya, the conqueror of the Daitya city. This Daitya city was, it's called Hiranyapura. It's a famous golden city of the Daityas, which was in the ocean, in the Arabian Sea to the west of India. The son of Puranjaya was Anena, and Pratu was the son of Anena. Anena was known as the Sinless. From Pratu sprang up, and this is not Pratu, the avatar Pratu, who we have read about, but someone named after the avatar Pratu. From Pratu sprang up Vishvaranthi, and Chandra was born of Vishvaranthi, and Yuvanashva was the son of Chandra. The son of Yuvanashva was Shabasta, by whom the town of Shabasti was built, while Brihadashva was the son of Shabasta and of the former of Brihadashva. Kuvalayashva was born. With a view to obliging the sage Utanka, the powerful Kuvalayashva, surrounded by his 21,000 sons, killed a demon, Dhundhu by name, and thereby became known as Dhundhumara, which means the death of Dhundhu. Almost all the aforesaid sons of Dhundhumara, however, were burnt up by the fire that issued from the mouth of Dhundhu during that great war. Only 3, Dridhashva, Kapilashva, and Bhadrashva, were left alive, O scion of Bharata. Haryashva was the son of Dridhashva, while the son of Haryashva was called Nikumbha. Barhanashva was the son of Nikumbha. Krishashva, the son of Barhanashva, and Senajit was the son of Krishashva. Senajit's son was Yuvanashva. Being issueless and therefore full of despair, the latter, Yuvanashva, retired to a forest hermitage along with his 100 wives. The sages of that hermitage were very compassionate by nature. Lo, with great concentration of mind, they conducted on his behalf a sacrifice intended to propitiate Indra, the Lord of Paradise, to try to gain him a child. Feeling thirsty at night, the king Yuvanashva entered their sacrificial hut, and finding the Brahmanas in charge of the yajna asleep, drank the water that had been consecrated with mantras and reserved for the principal queen himself. So in this Indra yajna, they had consecrated water with mantras to help the queen conceive a child. But they hadn't explained to him which water was which, since it was in their hut, and they didn't think he was going to come in there in the middle of the night and drink it. Seeing the sacrificial pitcher without water when they got up in the early hours, O Raja, the priests now inquired of the king whose work it was that the water, capable of producing a male child, had been quaffed. Having presently come to know that the water had been drunk by the king himself, as impelled by Providence, they offered salutation to the Almighty Lord, saying, "Oh, the power of destiny alone is the real strength." Then, when the time came, after a period of a pregnancy, a son who was destined to be a ruler of the globe was born, splitting open, it is said, the right pelvic region of King Yuvanashva, since he bore the child. When the babe cried much for being suckled, and the Brahmanas anxiously inquired, "Whom will this prince suck?" Indra put into the babe's mouth his index finger dripping with the divine amritam, saying, "The babe will suck me," or in Sanskrit, Mam dhata, do not cry, my child. And because Indra said Mam dhata, the child was given the name Mandhata. The father of the babe did not die by the grace of the Brahmanas and the gods, even from the severe wound of giving birth without a female body. He forthwith attained perfection and final moksha in that very ashram through asceticism. Indra, for his part, gave him, O dear Parikshit, the name of Trasadasyu, the terror of miscreants, or the terror of bandits, inasmuch as villains like Ravana were much afraid of him and felt greatly agitated. Powerful through the might of the immortal Lord, Mandhata, son of Yuvanashva, ruled the globe consisting of the 7 dvipas as its one supreme lord. Although a knower of the self, he propitiated Lord Vishnu, the deity presiding over sacrifices, who not only represents all the gods, but embodies all and is above sense perception, by means of a number of yajnas in which liberal dakshinas, or presents of money, were given to the brahmanas. As a matter of fact, the material to be used in the yajna performance, the sacred texts recited in the course of the yajna, the procedure laid down for conducting it, the yajna itself, the yajamana, the chief sponsor of the yajna, as well as the priests officiating at the yajna, dharma, the place as well as the time of a yajna performance, in fact, the whole universe represents his body, Lord Vishnu's body. It was such a Lord whom Mandhata worshipped through the aforesaid yajnas. The whole extent of land from the point where the sun rises to the point where it sets is called the territory of Mandhata, the son of Yuvanashva. In other words, the whole earth. The emperor Mandhata begot through his queen Bindumati, the daughter of Shashabindu, 3 sons, Purukutsa, Ambarisha, and Muchukunda. Muchukunda turned out to be a mystic sage. He, though born a Kshatriya, became a Brahmana. All the 50 sisters of these princes, so they also had 50 daughters, chose the sage Sobhari for their husband. Submerged in the water of the holy Yamuna and practicing supreme asceticism there, the Brahmana Sobhari conceived a longing for conjugal delight, or sexual pleasure, on seeing the happiness of a leader of fish pairing with other fish of the opposite sex, and accordingly approached and asked the king Mandhata for a girl in marriage. The emperor too said in reply, "Let a girl be gladly taken by you in the event of your being chosen by her of her own will, O holy Brahmana." The sage Sobhari thought within himself, "I have been refused by the emperor, thinking me to be unwelcome to women, knowing that I am disliked by them, being old, covered with wrinkles, and gray-haired, with my head shaking. I shall make myself so perfect as to be coveted even by celestial women, much more by human princesses." Thus resolved, the powerful sage was ushered by the chamberlain into the gymnasium set apart for the princesses, which was full of luxuries of every description. And lo, that one individual was desired by all the 50 princesses to be their husband, since using his extreme Brahmanical powers, he had assumed a superhumanly attractive body. There arose a great quarrel over him among those girls, so that casting sisterly affection to the winds, they said to one another, "He's fit for me and not for you," their heart being set on him. The said sage Sobhari, who, being a student of Rig Veda, was a master of powerful mantras, reveled with his 50 wives every day in mansions that were equipped with invaluable appendages by his inexhaustible wealth of asceticism, and which were not only crowded with men and women, servants and maidservants, well decked with ornaments, but were also full of singing birds and bees and panegyrists, which are bards, as well as on the margin of lakes of limpid water studded with beds of kalharas, and in parks of every description, using valuable beds and seats, costly wearing apparel and precious jewels, and taking delight in baths, pigments, eatables, and flowers. Observing the luxurious household life of Saubhari, even Mandhata, the ruler of the entire globe consisting of the 7 dvipas, felt greatly amazed and gave up all pride accompanying the fortune of a universal monarch, seeing the greater material fortune of Saubhari. Thus fully attached to his household life and enjoying sense objects of all kinds, Saubhari did not feel satiated with manifold delights, any more than a fire would feel satiated by being fed more and more ghee. It just burns hotter. On a certain occasion, while sitting at ease, that teacher of those professing the Rig Veda, perceiving his own fall from asceticism brought about by his association with the fish through the agency of his own mind, since all this started by him watching two fish having sex, and thought that that looked nice. He said to himself, look at this fall of mine, a saintly ascetic who had observed sacred vows until recently, but whose asceticism, though maintained for long, has been swept away thanks to a moment's mental association with aquatic creatures underwater. He who seeks liberation from the trammels of worldly existence should therefore eschew with one's mind, body, and senses the company of those who have taken to a married life, and should never allow his senses to move out into the midst of sense objects. Living all alone without any companion in seclusion, he should concentrate his mind on the infinite Lord, and betake himself only to pious souls devoted to him, if at all company is desired. I was a companionless ascetic till recently. Thanks to the company of fish underwater, I later on became 50, as it were, by marrying as many wives. And again, by begetting 100 sons through each, I became divided into 5,000 parts. Now that my judgment has been obscured by infatuation, etc., the adjuncts of Maya or Prakriti, and I have begun to look upon the objects of senses as worth seeking, I find no limit to desires relating to the duties of both husband and wife. Thus, staying at home for a long time, he eventually got disgusted with it, with materialism, and having embraced again the life of an anchorite, retired to the forest. And his wives, too, who all looked upon their husband as a deity, followed suit. Having practiced there in the forest severe asceticism that emaciated his body, the sage, who had now mastered his self, merged his soul along with the sacred fires in the Supreme Spirit, and attained final moksha in the form of oneness with the Absolute. Observing the absorption of their husband into the Supreme Spirit, O great king, his wives followed him and reached the same goal by virtue of his spiritual glory, even as flames get extinguished with the fire that has cooled down for want of fuel. Thus ends the 6th discourse, hinging on the story of Saubhari, in Book 9 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 7, the story of the king Harishchandra. Sri Shuka resumed. The foremost of the 3 sons of Mandhata, who is celebrated by the name of Ambarisha, named after his ancestor Ambarisha, was adopted as a son by his grandfather Yuvanashva, and Yovanashva was the son of this Ambarisha. Harita was the son of Yovanashva. These 3 turned out to be the foremost of Mandhata's line and the first of the 3 branches of this line. Purukutsa, the eldest of the 3 sons of Mandhata, was taken to Rasatala, the 6th deepest of the subterranean lokas, going down, by Narmada, the river goddess, as directed by Vasuki, the king of the Nagas, the same Narmada who had been given to him in marriage by his brothers, the serpent, the Nagas. There indeed, Purukutsa, who wielded the power infused into him by Lord Vishnu, killed a number of Gandharvas, who, being enemies of the Nagas, deserved to be slain. So in other words, there was a war in Rasatala Loka between the Nagas and the Gandharvas, some Gandharvas in Rasatala. Radha, this is Book 9, Discourse 7. So in other words, there was in Rasatala Loka, which is the 6th of the 7 talas down, it's the 6th one down, second from the bottom. There was a war between Nagas and Gandharvas, and Vasuki sent the river goddess Narmada Devi, who is a Naga goddess, to bring Purukutsa down to help them fight. In recognition of this service, since he helped the Nagas gain the victory, he secured from Vasuki, the chief of the Nagas, the boon of security from all serpents for those who remember this anecdote. Purukutsa's son, named after his grandfather, was Trasadasyu, since his grandfather was Mandhata, but Indra gave him the name of Trasadasyu. So named after his grandfather, Purukutsa's son was named Trasadasyu, who was the father of Anaranya. Anaranya's son was Haryashva, and of Haryashva, Aruna was born, while from the latter sprang up Tribandhana. Tribandhana's son, Satyavrata, became celebrated under the name of Trishanku. And we have here a so he was cursed by his father, as we're about to be told, but the Bhagavatam glosses over why. The story is told elsewhere. It's told in the Harivansha. But a footnote here explains it to us that Trishanku was guilty of 3 offenses, which tormented him like as many darts or spikes, which is what Trishanku means, 3 spikes. The first was that he displeased his father and invited his curse by forcibly carrying away a Brahmana girl who was just being married, kidnapped a bride. The second of his 3 great sins was that he killed a cow belonging to his guru, the sage Vasishta. And the third, which was comparatively minor, was that he ate meat without having consecrated it by sprinkling it with water first, which is obviously much more minor than kidnapping or killing a cow. But because he did these 3 things, having got the rank of a Chandala under a curse from his father, in other words, cursed to the lowest levels of society, like an outcast, he bodily ascended to heaven by virtue of the extraordinary might of the sage Vishvamitra, a scion of Kushika, and can be seen in the heavens in the form of a star named after him, even to this day, having been forcibly stopped in midair by the same seer when hurled head downward by the gods from heaven. So it's a whole long story given in the Harivansha, but Shuka does not get into it. Trishanku's son was Harishchandra, because of whom there raged a fight lasting for many years between the sages Vishvamitra and Vasishta, who, having been mutually cursed by each other, had transformed into 2 birds. So it is well known, we are told in a footnote here, this whole story is given elsewhere. I know that it's in the Markandeya Purana, and I think it's in other places too. That under the pretext of demanding the dakshina due to himself for the Raja Suya yajna conducted by Vishwamitra on behalf of Raja Harishchandra. So what he demanded for his fee was Vishwamitra stripped him of everything he owned and persecuted him in many other ways too, out of hatred for him, due to that's a whole long story why there was a grudge. But Harishchandra remained true to his word and firm under the most trying circumstances. And his guru, the sage Vasishta, flew into a rage at his treatment by Vishwamitra and cursed Vishwamitra to turn him into an adi, a type of crane. And Vishwamitra counter-cursed Vasishta to turn him into a heron. And as in the form of a giant crane and heron of like titanic scale, they had this huge battle. It almost destroyed the world. It's a whole long story given in the Markandeya Purana. So this is when that happened. Devoid of any issue and sad at heart, Harishchandra sought, under the instructions of the sage Narada, Varuna, the god of water, as his protector, with the following prayer: "Let a son be born to me, O Lord. If he turns out to be a hero, O great Lord, I shall propitiate you by sacrificing him to you." Varuna granted his prayer, saying, "Be it so." And through the agency of Varuna, a son, Rohita by name, was born to Harishchandra. "Now that a son has been born to you, propitiate me, dear king, by sacrificing him to me," Varuna said to Harishchandra, who replied, "A prospective victim is considered fit for being sacrificed only when it has passed the age of 10 days. On the child having crossed the age of 10 days, the god appeared before him again and said, "Sacrifice the child now." Harishchandra replied, "A prospective victim is fit for being sacrificed only when it has teethed." So after the dentition of the child, after it got its first tooth, Varuna approached again and said once more, "The teeth have appeared, propitiate me." Thereupon the king replied, "When its teeth have fallen, the victim will be fit for being sacrificed then." So when it had lost its baby teeth, Varuna appeared once more and said, "The teeth of the prospective victim have fallen. Worship me now. To this Harishchandra replied, when the teeth of the prospective victim sprout again, then alone is the prospective victim regarded as sacred. So on the child having gotten all of its adult teeth, the god of water appeared again and said once more, the teeth have grown again, sacrifice the child. Thereupon Harishchandra replied, a prospective victim belonging to the Kshatriya race is recognized as sacred and fit to be sacrificed only when he is able to put on his armor, O Lord. So in this way, the god of water waited for the time he was asked to wait by Harishchandra, whose mind was bound with ties of affection and who was gaining time due to love for his son. Having come to know of the aforesaid sacrifice intended to be performed by his father, Rohita, who was now a young boy, betook himself to the woods, bow in hand, anxious to save his life, ran away from home because sooner or later he thinks that his father is going to sacrifice him to Varuna. Hearing that, visited by angry Varuna, the god of water, his father had developed a disease of dropsy, since Varuna has concluded that he's never going to keep his word and so cursed him with dropsy. Rohita was about to return to his home when Indra stopped him, saying that he would be sacrificed to Varuna if he went home. Indra further counseled Rohita to undertake a holy tour over the earth by visiting sacred lakes and rivers and other places of pilgrimage, in order to atone for the offense of his father against Varuna by lying to him, and thereby rid him of his malady of dropsy. And Rohita, too, tarried in the forest for a year, going from place to place, as advised by Indra. Likewise, during the second, third, fourth, and fifth years as well, Indra, the slayer of the demon Vritra, came to him, disguised as an aged Brahmana, and repeated the same advice to don't go home, continue visiting pilgrimage sites in the forest. Having roamed about in the woods during the sixth year as well, Rohita purchased from Ajigartha, a descendant of the Bhargavas, his middle son, his second of three sons, Shunashepa by name, while returning to the city in order to see his father, and handing him over to Harishchandra, his own father, as a victim to be sacrificed to Varuna in his place, bowed low to him. Thereupon, the highly renowned Harishchandra, whose stories were sung by the great, propitiated Varuna, the god of water, and the other gods by means of a human sacrifice of a child, which he had promised, and was consequently relieved of his dropsy. It's a stomach disease. At that sacrifice, the sage Vishvamitra officiated as the Hota, the sage Damadagni, who had duly controlled his mind, as the Advaryu, the sage Vasishta as the Brahma, and Brahma as a type of priest, and the sage Agastya as the Udgata, the chanter of the Samaveda. So they straight up sacrificed a child. Pleased with him, Indra gave him a chariot of gold. The glory of so there is more to the story. The glory of Sunashepa, who the sacrificial victim, who ended up surviving and in fact attained moksha during his lifetime, will be recounted later in connection with the story of Vishvamitra's son. And highly gratified to perceive on another occasion the firmness of the king Harishchandra, as well as of his wife Shaibya, firmness which derived its strength from his veracity, the sage Vishvamitra vouchsafed to him as a boon unobstructed knowledge of the self. Mentally merging his mind in earth, he identified the earth with water, water with fire, and the latter with the air, and again merging the air in ether, the latter in the tamasika aspect of the ego, and the said tamasika ego and the mahattattva, the principle of cosmic intelligence, and laying aside its objective character, he contemplated its knowledge aspect as his very self, and through such contemplation, he finally and thoroughly burnt his ignorance that veiled the nature of the self. Again, giving up that contemplation too, through consciousness consisting of unmixed bliss, and with all his bondage in the shape of self-identification with the body and so on, shaken off, he stood in his essential character, which is beyond the range of description and reasoning. Thus ends the seventh discourse entitled The Story of Harishchandra in Book 9 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahamsa Samhita. And I think that might be a good place to pause. It's 10 o'clock, and the next discourse gets into the story of King Sagara, which gets into the story of Bhagavata and the descent of the Ganga. So the next few discourses are kind of one connected story. So I think it's probably good to break here rather than getting partly into that.
Awesome. Thanks so much,
Yeah.
Devala.
Yeah, thank you all very much for coming. This is kind of one of those days when it's mostly complicated genealogy of a long list of kings, which is definitely a part of all the Puranas.
Definitely, yeah. Thank you, Devala.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful, blessed day.
Yes, you
Jai
too.
Gurudev.
Jai Gurudev.
Jai Shri Krishna.
Jai Shri Krishna.